All right. Well, hey, everybody. Happy Tuesday and welcome to another Future Focus where we are exploring and navigating the intersection of business, technology, and human experience. I am looking forward to this one. I'm joined today by Nick DeWilde. He's the co-founder of Exec, and we are going to be talking about an extremely pertinent topic. Even just backstage, we were talking about this. How do we actually make skill development tangible and impactful and meet people where they are in a world that I don't know about all you watching and listening, but it feels to me like every conversation I have, people are overwhelmed, they're exhausted. It feels like everything is just burning around them. And so the thought of doing one more thing on top of it just feels inconceivable, to quote The Princess Bride. And so what we want to do is talk about how do we actually nurture talent and how do we grow people in that environment and actually take them to mastery. So we're going to talk about what kind of skills are important. We're going to talk about how you go about that. So Nick, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Well, so before we get into the meat and potatoes of that, I am kind of curious your background and how did this become an area of focus for you to go, hey, this is a real problem that I want to start solving? What did that look like for you?
Great question. So probably started back when I was post-college in the startup world. I was an early stage startup and this is a 7-person company, like making up as I went along.
And that's an environment where skill development and thinking on your feet is cranked to the max.
Yes. And so this was 2012, 13, right? But sort of before there was a big corpus of courses and kind of online knowledge about how to get smart on things like growth hacking and design and all these things. And so,
things were still relatively institutionalized at that point. It was a little not as open source.
Yes, exactly. And so I said I had planned after school to be a screenwriter. So I'd gone to LA to like do the screenwriter thing, and then I'd sort of found my way into startups as one does. And so
from screenwriter to startups, I love it.
Yeah, this was a time when I think the startup world was very open and non-institutionalized, and it was just sort of like, hey, if you're ambitious and hardworking and kind of willing to work all hours, someone will take a chance on you, and that was kind of the case for me, which was awesome. So I ended up saying, okay, where do I learn these things? Well, business school is where you learn business. And so ended up, going to business school at GSB, which was a great experience, but it was not the sort of skill sets that I was looking for, right? I was looking.
Are you saying you didn't come out of an institution with a perfectly honed skill set that translated just one for one over to the business world?
You'd be shocked to hear that.
I am absolutely shocked that your experience was not that, because 99 out of 100 people I talk to say everything I learned in university translated. I was fully prepared for the workforce.
Yeah, totally. So it was just, I was like, okay, well, I'm not learning how to the things that were important in that job were like figure out SEO, help on product design, and those sort of practitioner level skills just like sort of weren't taught in business school. And really the question was, where are they taught, right? And this was right around kind of 2013 when Dev Bootcamp had sort of come out, which let's teach people coding through a bootcamp style. And I saw a bunch of people whose lives really changed by it, and so got really excited about this space of sort of just the bootcamp space in general. Teamed up during my second year with a couple of guys I knew from beforehand who were starting essentially a bootcamp for all sorts of non-technical skills. So product design, growth marketing, sales and business development. And they basically brought me on to help run it. And I spent the next 5 years doing that. It was one of the most rewarding, fun experiences I've had professionally. And we would, we brought people in person to San Francisco. We were their sort of entry point into the startup world. We not only sort of focused on how to teach them important skills that would get them jobs, but also like imbued them with culture. We sort of, we really wanted to make sure that like they came out as good employees. So we didn't treat them like customers. We didn't coddle them. We made sure that like
No, it's we're setting you up for success in your job.
yes, we wanted them to breathe a sigh of relief when they were out of our purview into a company where they were like, oh, you know, I feel very prepared for this. So it was that was a lot of the focus, and that sort of led to in 2020. A good friend of mine from business school, her name's Rachel Romer Carlson, started a company called Guild Education.
I'm very familiar with Guild.
Yeah,
I know them well.
The awesome organization, and she invited me to come join them to help on sort of stand up product marketing, which was a really cool experience. Guild has such a kind of
they've got a unique
good
flavor
mission.
of what they're doing. Yeah,
yeah,
and what they're doing, it bleeds into everything they do.
Totally. And so it was just, I mean, it was really, it was formative in a lot of ways. I think one way was, seeing how much, you're seeing like the chaos that essentially people leaders were going through during that 2020, 2021 period, where kind of every quarter there was some kind of like macro shock that was creating lots of messy people problems within their organization.
Yes. Yep.
And that was necessitating, I think, a lot of thrash, right? And so on the one hand,
yeah,
you as you've experienced personally, right? It's like on the one hand, they're thinking, okay, how do I think forward to think of these sort of future-proof skills for my workers? How do I think about the labor markets and sort of shifting demographics? But also, how do I literally solve some of these like messy human problems?
How do I make it to the end of my week successfully?
That's right. So, and I think the thing I learned there was when you get an HR leader or a talent development leader sort of precious time, make sure you can solve a problem that's important to them. And so that sort of informed a lot of what we did when we built Exec. And I'm happy to kind of go into that later, but that's sort of my origin story.
But I think what's interesting about your story in this, and I think that's relevant to all this, because, to anybody who watches and listens and thinks I'm kind of taking a hard knock on the higher education institutions, I actually think there's tremendous value in some of the stuff that happens in higher education. I think the expectations that people get is where there's a mismatch, where, to your point, there's this idea that, okay, this is going to give me everything I need to be successful in a career or in my job. And it's like, actually, it's not. It may set up the institutional knowledge base so that you understand all these different big macro pieces. But there's a huge difference between the academia of, the psychology, the business rules, like all these macro things. And honestly, not everybody needs that. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes of kind of the higher education boom, was this idea that, well, everybody needs that. And it's like, well, no, actually, everybody doesn't need that. You definitely need people who have that. But a lot of people, they just need to be like, what do I need to do in my job to be really, really successful? And that's where that disconnect I've seen my whole life is, okay, well, now you're done with that. Now you need to actually learn how to do the real work. And that's where the whole need to grow people and develop them in an organization, it's critical. Because if you don't, you're truly leaving this up to random chance, whether people are going to make it or sink. And it's a high stakes game, which has only gotten more high stakes in the past few years. I mean, it's always been a high stakes game, but now you're dealing with a workforce that's leaving. So the institutional knowledge is going with it. You're dealing with technological and cultural change happening at a pace like it's never happened before. So there isn't the like, well, this is how we've always done it. So you've got kind of time to pick it up and people to pick it up. It's one of those things that if you're not intentional about this stuff, it'll implode.
And I think you bring up sort of higher education, and I think the thing I see in companies that I sort of not am against, but I kind of push back on is like, I think often L&D leaders kind of look at school and they say, okay, school is sort of the where learning is really professionalized and happens. And I think that, when it comes to what do the sort of primordial environments of learning look like, they look a hell of a lot more like work than like school. And I think that's too often.
Yeah.
I
got 7 kids, and it's not like it's only true with adults.
Yes, exactly.
The same is true with my kids. They learn more when we're actually doing something and going, okay, today we're going to actually do this thing, and you're going to figure out how to do it along the way. They learn a lot more through that than they do in some of the other things. And granted, the institutional knowledge is foundational. I just think of an example with my son where his math skills, he is learning through the academic models. He's learning the fundamentals of mathematics and how those things work together. That's great. But then when we talked about how taxes work and the way you calculate taxes and factor those, that's where he's actually going, oh, this is how these things like come together in real life. And it's that mix of the two that's the sweet spot.
You got your kids doing your taxes for you. This is genius. Okay.
I do not have my.
Now I'm seeing how the family all works together. Okay, this makes sense.
Yeah, no, I am not having my children do my taxes, but I'm trying to educate them because, again, they don't. A lot of times that kind of stuff doesn't come up in terms of, and that's one example, but this is a real example of what can happen in a professional's career where it's like, well, I learned all this stuff, but like I didn't really learn how to do the job.
Yeah, and like you take I think we were talking earlier, right? Like about how find these like events that are the occasion for learning, right? Let's just take let's take a situation that everyone knows, right? You get a flat tire, right? When you get that flat tire, right? You having some sense of what a car jack is and what a wrench is and what a wheel, all these things that sort of, you need the semantic
where to look for your spare. Like those things are helpful.
You have to have some sort of semantic academic knowledge about stuff, right? To have a model of the world. But you also suddenly have this sort of moment where now you have the occasion for learning, where now if you pull up a piece of content, that content, you are glued to it, you're going to stick to it, you're focused on it, and like that will make a big impression on you. And because you're using it right away and the stakes are high. And I think too much of work-based learning is sort of like, oh, let's, we were talking about competencies and that, like, let's sort of develop these competencies that maybe will be important at some point, or is
they'll use.
The sort of the company cares about in general, but like, whereas if you say, hey, we have people who are doing their performance feedback in the next 2 weeks, and we need to make sure they are equipped for that, or else they're going to have some really painful, crappy conversations. How do we just enable them throughout? I think that's really the magic.
Well, and what's interesting is I'm trying to remember who it was. It's probably been a couple of years since we had this conversation, but I think this is important, not just, I have a lot of folks who might be learning leaders that are on, that watch and listen to this. I also have a lot of just business leaders where I think one of the things we often fail to consider is a lot of what we've been trained or our experience has taught us about the way you teach people things goes actually counterintuitive to this, what you just described. It's like, oh, well, the way we need to make sure people are educated and prepared to be successful is we, from the top down, identify the things that we know are going to be important at some time, and let's just instill all this institutional information into them, and then it'll just work itself out at the right time. Instead of going, that's actually not how it works with people. And to your point, again, it was a couple of years ago where we really dug into this. Those moments, those catalysts of opportunity in people's lives where they go, I just hit a wall.
Yes.
And those transition periods are the absolute best point in time to say, hey, this is going to be relevant for you right now. So let's actually get you what you need to be successful and effective in what you're trying to do right now. And historically, that's been harder. It's getting a lot easier. But to your point, that's actually where you're going to drive sustainable change in an organization.
And like, this is why hopefully this isn't too controversial, but no one has touched your LinkedIn Learning library in months or weeks, because this content is sort of like it's sitting there, right? People aren't accessing it because they don't have the occasion to. It's not sort of driving. It's not there's no deep kind of motivation, right? Like we've had libraries for a long time. If it turned out that like an infinite content library was the thing that would make the difference between us today and where we want to be, like everyone would be a super genius, right? And would be getting all the promotions they want to, but we're not. And so the question we have to ask is sort of why. And I think a lot of it is learning is about the context so much more than it is about the content.
Yeah. Well, and I think to your point, and this goes back to the complexity that I think learning and developing skills is probably one of the most misunderstood and just oversimplified. Like it's just misunderstood in general, where people are like, well, you just do this and it works. And it's like, no, actually there's a whole lot of psychology. There's a whole lot of stuff going on to it. But one of the things that you just brought up about like content libraries, and this is another one of those where I'll see the like polarization. Some people think they're the savior of the world. Other people think they're useless. And my view on it is they serve a purpose, because if you don't have access to certain things, when those opportunities come up, you tend to miss your window of opportunity. Because to your point of the tire went flat, if you go, oh, the tire went flat, we've got to go build a thing that explains to somebody how to fix a flat tire. Well, they've already called a tow truck and it's like, yeah, sorry, like too late. But it's one of those things we're going, but they have to know, and you have to be able to make sure they're aware that, hey, you're trying to change a flat tire right now. Here's the thing that's going to help you change the flat tire. And that thing you point them to, better show them how to change a flat tire, not get into the history of tires and auto manufacturing and how and you're like, okay, like get to it. Like I'm trying to fix my tire, not take a 2-hour certification on the history of automobiles type of a thing. And I think that's where they can serve a purpose, but it's about that broader architecture of understanding what's really going on in a person's life.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right. Like when it comes to sort of anything you want to do, right? There's the model layer, there's the what, right? How do I make sure I know the words? There is the how, which is always best taught by watching someone who's like you, who's doing this thing at your level where you can pause it and slow it down. There's a great like moment for async content.
Yes.
I think a lot of companies maybe did believe, I don't know if how many still believe this, but that, okay, people are craving learning, right? People are craving to develop their skills. Giving just sort of turning on a big learning library and saying, great, now you have skill development at your fingertips. It won't happen unless it is the right content at the right moment in the right size is put in the way of sort of slotted in a nice way as they are looking for an answer.
Well, and I think again, it goes back to things are misunderstood. So I can just say from being a senior leader in companies, I see where these things go south. And employees or whoever who's watching, go ahead and validate this. But I see this all the time where you'll see this come up where people crave development. They know that. They say, I do want to develop, because especially now, people are recognizing, hey, I have to stay on top of my game or risk obsolescence in some cases. And so there is this recognition like, yes, I want to develop, but where that gets misinterpreted is when it's then filtered through the lens of people who go, oh, I hear development and I think going to school. And so then I have this idea that people are like, I just want to like chill on my couch and binge learn stuff. It's like, well, okay, that's not what people are saying when they say they're craving development. They mean they're craving opportunities to get better at something that's going to translate to being either better at their current job or setting them up for success in their next job, not sitting in a beanbag, smoking a hookah and like just, for the sake of pontification, building their knowledge base. People just don't have time or capacity for that right now.
I think the best line here is like learning should be effortful. right? Good learning requires effort. It requires having to drudge up, remember something. It requires sort of like a little bit of like mental anguish
Yes.
to really actually cement it in. I think one of the biggest challenges I see, especially sort of when we're designing programs, is there is on the one hand a desire to deliver service that makes people happy, right? Which is like, hey, instead of making this a 3-hour thing, can we just cram this all into 1 hour, right? So that people can get like do this during their lunch break, and like, can we make this as easy as kind of a kind of easy user experience as possible? But they're at the same time they're also saying, hey, how do we make sure this knowledge sticks? And it's like, well, for the knowledge to really stick, you have to have people contend
It
with
has
it.
to
You
be
have to have
hard.
it has to be a little hard, right? And so I think that is often the tension that I see most often in sort of learning leaders doing program design.
So let's talk about the pulling that off, because I think we've set the table and on what the challenge ahead of us is. But statistically, I mean, I just was involved in one of the biggest research reports out there on this. There is a desire for growth. I think everybody recognizes, or at least the vast majority, I think it was like 80% of people recognized they need to grow in their skills, in their career, these other things. But then there is this disconnect of, well, typically, traditionally, how it's been done has not been terribly effective. So, one, as you lean into this, what have you seen work? Because again, going back to the personalization piece of knowing where everybody is and what they're doing and going, okay, in theory, that sounds great. Oh, this person needs to change a tire. This person needs to check the oil. This person's actually in the middle of laying wood floors. Like, that can be overwhelming, and an organization could go, yeah, I get that. I'd love to get to that point. That just doesn't seem feasible. I think there's some ways that you can do that, but when you're trying to place a bigger bet, where have you seen landing the plane on that level of personalization that's relevant and applicable to folks, but is also not so overgeneralized or almost caricatured of traditional education that people go, yeah, that was nice, but it didn't actually help me get better at anything.
Yeah, I think I start from the question of like, in a world where what has happened in the past decade, we have all gotten insanely distracted. Our attention has fragmented like crazy, right? So every time you're on your computer or your phone, you are competing with your work tasks. You're competing with entertainment, Netflix, TikTok, whatever it is, right? And so it's really hard for education and learning content to compete at that game, except for people who are intensely motivated, right? So we talked about the person trying to change the tire. That person will tune in to the sort of async video when they need to. And if you can make that easy, if you can sort of set the right triggers, make the content really good, you can work that. What does learning have in its favor? How does learning win? Well, it had the one thing that entertainment has not had a chance to crack is social. The fact that human beings innately, what are we really good at? We're great at learning from other human beings. When we have other humans in the room, when a coach is going to show up at a coaching session, it is a big motivator, a big social motivator to show up and maybe even have done your homework. When you've got a group workshop and that there are going to be your peers there, and maybe someone's going to be there who cares that you show up, you are much more likely to make the occasion and show up. And so I think about this a lot in the context, like, how do we make sure that we first have some context that is going to drive motivation? And to me, like, social aspects are really good at driving motivation. Then you ask the question of personal. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. No, I was just saying, I think the social, and I mean, we can dig into that because I think, but I'll let you finish your thought on that, because I think that social collaboration and accountability glue is a critical component in terms of success.
Totally. And so I sort of start with that as a really important piece of any learning program. And then I step back and I say, okay, well, like, you know, the when you have when you want to teach skills, right, you have to deliver some kind of framework to people, right? And like the chance of you evaluating everyone's knowledge of that framework beforehand and making it perfectly tuned to 20 people and their different needs, like it's tough to do, right? And give yourself some grace. Like you can't always do it perfectly, but what you can do is you can make sure there's an interactive session component, around it where you're getting to interface with it and actually sort of, display your knowledge, display your understanding. You're getting some feedback on your ability to implement that framework. Maybe it's a group coaching or facilitated session where everyone gets to talk and share their experiences. This is actually something that business school did really well. They had people from all sorts of industries who could come in and share insights on how they did things. And then I think ultimately, the reason why we really love, one-on-one coaching is because ultimately coaching is a lot of that personalization. It says, hey, you have certain goals for yourself within the context of this organization, within your wider career. You also have things that are coming up in your work that is very idiosyncratic, that requires you divulging a little bit and sharing and having someone that you trust to have those conversations with. And so to me, when it comes to where can you get sort of personalization plus social, plus like a highly motivated environment, that one-on-one coaching environment is really a special place to do that.
Okay. Something that you hit on, or that I think I would add on top of this that gets skipped a lot, and some of this is just a mindset shift, is, kind of like, and again, I don't think we often take into account how much our youth forms us. But even growing up, most of us know like school was mandatory and everybody kind of had to go through the same thing. And that starts to shape and form this idea that, okay, so if we're going to do this, it has to be for everyone and everybody has to go through the same experience. And I actually think that's actually one of the greatest tragedies with a lot of this stuff is we don't actually take the time to say, hey, let's identify what we're really hoping to get out of some of this stuff. And you know what? Some people might actually not need that. They may not actually benefit from that. And that's okay. And we don't need to clockwork orange people through an experience so that we feel good about the fact that like every single person did it. And that's a really uncomfortable space for some organizations to go, yeah, but like, what about the ones that don't do it? And you're like, well, if you build something in place to identify, are you actively able to do the things that really we're trying to actually get out of this experience? Then I don't care that you don't need to be involved in it because you're already able to do it. I don't actually want to waste your time on something that you're already perfectly capable of doing. If you know how to change a tire by yourself, I don't need you to watch the YouTube video on how to change a tire. Just change a tire. You know the star pattern, you know where it is, you know the jack. I'm not going to go, well, I'd feel a lot better if you watched the 40-minute YouTube video on this before, and you're like, I'm a mechanic, man. Like, leave me alone. But I think that mindset is very persistent sometimes in organizations where it's like, well, if we do this, we have to make sure we do something that works for everyone. And as a result, it's actually not good for anyone because you're trying to create a universal box that doesn't fit anyone.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're dead on, right? And what you want is a room full of people who've opted, and this could be a Zoom room, this can be a real room, who've like opted to be here, who are excited, who have some occasion to use this thing. And I think a lot of that is on the comms around learning, right? How do you get people excited to understand, hey, what can you do with this? What can how much more money could you make, if you were excellent at all these skills, right? And so I think there's work you can do to sort of inspire motivation, but you're totally right. There's also work you can do to determine, should this person, be here in the first place?
Yeah. Well, and that analysis and identification piece, to me, you said it earlier, and this is true in everything. Context is so important. And we often fail to set that context up front of what is even the point of this? What are you going to, like, what types of things are you going to benefit from out of this thing? And is that relevant to you? Because if it's not relevant to you, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want you wasting your time. I'd rather you focus on something that is more relevant to you than this. And when you skip that context, there's nothing worse than pulling somebody in and people go, why am I here?
Yes.
Like and maybe you can create an experience in an environment that's fun and great and people will tolerate it. But at the end of the day, they're still going to walk out and it truly was wasted time and effort because it's like, well, I mean, if I'd known that's what it was, I wouldn't have done it anyway because it has no relevance to me as a professional. But it was a goodish use of my time, I suppose.
I think there's an exercise that any learning or talent development leader could do, right, on a kind of quarterly basis and ask, what is relevant to us, right? And looking at different groups and saying like, what are the moments that are high stress, high anxiety that are coming up for different groups of people? Where are people going to need to perform in a way where there is a hook in their head that, like, if we where we have an occasion to be able to enable them to perform at a higher level, doing something that they're already going to do. So I think this performance management is like a good example of it, which is like, hey, we've got people who have to deliver feedback. We've got people who have to write up performance reviews. We have people who are going to have very hard conversations. There is no better time in a year, not during the promotion cycle, not during any other time, where like that is a more useful set of skills to embed in people.
Yeah. Versus having performance management learning opportunities in the middle of the summer when it's like, we're not doing this right now. I mean, there's really no relevance to it. There was something you had said that stuck with me that I was going to jump on. I'm totally slipping my mind on this, but so I'm curious on this one, because going back to the relevance of it and helping people connect the dots between these things, are there certain things that you're seeing as you look and talk to organizations? Oh, I remember. Actually, I'm going to pause there and go back to what I was going to say. One of the really interesting things, because we talked backstage about the importance of how do you do this well? One of the simplest things I found over the years is simply asking people where those gaps are. And I think one of the things that this can lead to a little bit of a conversation is, how do you do that in an effective way? Because I think of that, it's not actually a quote from Harrison Ford, whatever. But if I asked him what we should make, they would have said faster horses. And Henry Ford. Yeah. He didn't actually say it, but it's attributed to him. But anyway, it's one of those, like, you can't just go to people and say, well, what do you want? Because people don't typically think in terms of skills and behaviors. So there is this delicate balancing act of saying, we need to help contextualize what we mean so that you can kind of select from hey, are you struggling in these areas? You might not know what behavior or skill is tied to that, but we can contextualize it in a way where you go, oh, yes, I am struggling with that. That it would be pertinent to me. But that simple act sometimes of even just asking people in a meaningful way where they understand what you're asking can be so powerful, yet so simple, but it's often overlooked. It's like, well, let's get in a conference room and brainstorm. What are the top skills that we think we need to build in people? And based on our assumptions about what's going on, instead of going, I don't know, like, what are the things as a manager that you're going, geez Louise, every week I feel like I just cannot make traction on this type of a thing.
Yes. Yeah. Often when we're running a coaching program, what we want to do is we want to start both the coach and the individual with some context that sort of is fertile ground for a good coaching relationship to be built. And part of that you can do by saying, hey, what are your goals, right? But often people they draw a blank. It's a little hard to sort of, some people are very motivated.
Yeah, you can't just open.
But so often we like starting out these sessions with some stakeholder insights, right? And that could be just, hey, we had a conversation with your manager about like, what's their vision for you? What do they think? What do they think you're great at? What are the areas where that might be sort of derailers for you? We talked to your direct reports and we asked them these things. And what that does is it says, okay, great. Like, let's start. And we know that, any person has at least 3 things that are going to be important for them. Let's not make it a world of, 100 different items and how you scored on them and like what your,
Yeah.
I could go into this for a long time, but I think ultimately what people want to know are like, what are the 3 things that are keeping me from, being the person that I want to be and that I can be at work and in my personal life too. And so I think giving people stakeholder insights that can sort of inform what they want and what they want to learn. And especially it's social, right? It's coming from other people.
It is.
And when insights come from other people, they are salient, they resonate, and they create that occasion for motivation.
Yeah. Well, and on this one, the thing you brought up with that, and I think this is where it's often more complicated than it's treated. And sometimes we're in such a hurry to get to the finish line. We don't want to take the time to go, right, but how do we actually train for this event so that it's a success? Because going back to that point, you might not just be able to just go out and ask people, what do you want? You are going to need to contextualize that and help them be able to understand, like, well, what does that mean? I think that point of actually digging in the stakeholders of going, what kind of context are you seeing? How is this showing up? So that you have a broader picture. I think the whole data side of it, a lot of times people don't really realize what's going into things. And I think this is one of the things I get really excited about with AI is the fact that we actually can look at some of this data and go, people are saying this, their senior leaders are seeing this, the data is telling this, and we start getting more characters in the story to start to say, now what really is underneath all of that we can help people do that. But we've got to be able to tell that story and help people understand how to connect the dots.
Couldn't agree more.
So with the development piece though, are there themes? Because right now, I'm actually curious your take on this. Depending on who you talk to, you will see, all sorts of things of skills are changing. The half-life is, 6 months. Pretty soon it's going to be the goldfish thing. Skills don't last longer than a goldfish 6-second type of a thing, which I don't think that's helpful for anybody, because then they're just paranoid that anything they do is not going to be sustainable and it's all just a wash anyway. But then you also hear the rhetoric that, there's just certain things that are never going to change if we just invest in these kinds of things. It's durable. It's never going anywhere. And I don't think that's helpful, because that can lead to complacency or this idea that, well, if you ever just learn this thing, you're never going to have to adapt and evolve. What are you seeing in organizations in terms of safe bets? So if somebody's watching or listening to this going, either as a leader is trying to decide, where would I want to invest some of my chips? Or if somebody's an employee going, I'm just trying to figure out what is something that I can pursue that's going to have a shelf life longer than whatever effort I put into it. Are you seeing some things that are consistent?
Yeah, and I should, first caveat by saying I've spent time in the hard skills world, right? I told you about my experience, running running Tradecraft, which was, we taught growth and design, and that was like learn Figma, learn to do an SEO audit, things like that. I don't spend as much time in that world anymore, and so me being able to sort of correctly identify what are those kind of specific skills to different job profiles and things like that. That's a hard world, right?
And trust me, I wouldn't want anybody to go on record saying I'm declaring these are the skills. And when I see articles like that, I'm like, liar, type of a thing. So I appreciate the caveat, but I think anybody who watches and listens to my stuff knows I'm not saying, all right, this is the one. Nick DeWilde said it. Everybody bet your chips.
But what I will say is I think in a world where we've been living through the sort of knowledge work apparition, right? There's been a moment in time since the advent of the computer to now where you can do these jobs that are just like fully on your computer, you're sending information across, and like I don't know if if that is a aberration that will continue, or like we will reach a logical petering off of those type of jobs, right? We don't
Yeah.
know yet. Um, what seems pretty clear to me is that getting good at stuff that humans are uniquely capable of, right?
Okay.
And this is a lot of the human people skills, right? And that can be, if we're talking about sort of some of the most valuable ones, right? Things like selling things, making a customer want to buy more stuff from you. Those are things that that humans, are until robots are doing the purchasing. Humans will be doing the selling.
I love
It's,
that you
it's,
said that, because I think sometimes we forget that it's like we're dealing with people, and
yes,
people have a desire to interact with other people, type of a thing.
yes.
There's certain things they're fine working with a robot or, self-checkout type of a thing. But then there's certain things where it's like, I want to deal with another human being, type of a thing, whether that's a product or a service.
Totally. It's also, it's like a signal of respect the company does. Like if I'm trying to sell a customer something, and my competitor brings a robot salesperson, like I'm gonna win every time just by being a human, right? It's like so we know for a long time, right? Like
We sent our optimists to the sales meeting. Chances are you're probably not going to fare as well as the person that actually sends Nick to show up, and he actually, shows up and says hello.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so there are things that like humans are innately good at. I think that's also true within companies for like roles like management, right? That there are skills that are human skills, building trust, things like here's kind of one of my big mental models for how I view the world comes from a book called The Secret of Our Success. It's
Okay.
by an author named Joe Heinrich, and one of the things he looks at is he says, okay, if we want to understand why human beings are successful, like let's look at human beings in some of the most extreme circumstances, like shipwrecks. What is the difference between parties that survive shipwrecks and parties that perished? And he looks at it, and it's it's all of these humans had smart people who could use their big brains and think through stuff, right? Certainly there was a lot of that, but ultimately it was the groups of people who befriended whatever group was native to that environment, whether it was the tundra, the desert, the jungle, because humans learn from watching other humans. We are dialed in to pay attention to other humans. It's why in your social media feed, you don't follow that many companies, but you follow lots of people, because you care what other humans do and what they think. And the way we learn is we look for humans who are prestigious and similar to us, and we pay a lot of attention to them and we mimic them. And so when I think of what are the things that humans are good at, it's influencing other humans, right? And I think it will. Am I going to go out on a ledge and say I don't think AI will ever be able to influence other humans? Of course not, right? People have AI girlfriends and all sorts of things, right?
I mean,
Whatever.
AIs are, yeah. I know what you're getting at, because like, and I've got to follow on to what you're saying. So finish your thought.
So I mean, it's all to say that like I think if you're thinking, what are the skills that are going to be really valuable? Look at the skills that have been really valuable in the context of business forever, right? Look at the ones that sort of existed pre-computer. And do I think that prompt engineering, is probably a good thing to learn? Totally. But like you learn it in the flow of a need, in the flow of work. But like if I'm thinking about what am I going to teach my 2.5-year-old to do, it's either find things that he's insanely motivated to do, or like really focus on those kind of human level EQ skills.
Yeah. It's interesting. So what I was going to add to it was, you commented on the hard skills piece. And I think it goes back to the earlier point of our discussion, where the hard skills, I think there's a different level of focus we're going to need to put on them. And there's going to be far fewer people that need them as we move forward. So as I think, and it kind of going back to like the university model, do we need people who understand all the academia and all the things of everything that's, yeah, you do. But do you need everybody to have that level? No, you don't. You actually need certain people who are doing that are helping oversee and just make sure that everybody else is staying on track. But not everybody needs that level of context. And I think the same is true with like hard skills, where I even think of an industry that the hard skills got disrupted. You talked about boot camp, right? Software engineering got torpedoed in the last couple years. But it doesn't mean nobody ever needs to learn computer science anymore. It's like, well, no, there's a level of understanding computer science and the logic and the rhythms of computers and all this stuff. Will everyone need to know it at that level like they used to? No. Like I remember when the buzz was everybody needs to teach their kids how to code. And I was like, I am not getting on this bandwagon. If my kids want to do it, great. But not everybody's going to need to code. And it went back to this. There are going to be people who need to oversee and support and enable the people who are doing it. And that's fine. But to your point on the human skills, one of the things that I think the last 2 years has revealed is how little we actually understand about human behavior and skills. You know, I think we're notoriously egotistical and we're like, we know all there is to know about this. And then something like generative AI hits and we go, we actually know nothing about this. Because there are definitely components, even that I see, and I know you spend a lot of time in the coaching space. There are certain things that as I deconstruct coaching, that you start to go, there are certain elements of coaching that are very robotic and mechanical in nature that we maybe never would have seen underneath the surface before, because you were just like, well, Nick's a coach or Julie's a coach or whatever. And I don't really know what he or she does, but we know it gets this outcome and we kind of have a general sense of this stuff. So I don't know, coach is in this box. And all of a sudden now we're going, gosh, I guess we don't really know all that much about it. And even if you're a coach, you're going, I guess I just do these things. I've never really had to take the time to think about what are all the components of this. And now we're having to deconstruct that to a level of, okay, well, this part of the skill is actually super relevant and durable and probably will stand the test of time. This other part, probably not, because that is actually very mechanical in nature and it's very transactional. And it's something that, hey, you know, like I think of like the coaching example. People would much rather have an AI coach if all they need in that moment is, I just have a question and I want somebody to bounce back a couple ideas of how I might want to think about this. An AI coach would be fine for that.
Yep.
The intimacy of, I need to actually talk something through with someone and have me be understood on an emotional level, understand the complexity of what I'm going through, and actually meet me where I am and help walk me through that. I do not want an AI coach for that, because it's not going to meet that intimacy need that can only happen between two conscious beings. And I think that's one of those, we never had to think about that in the past. It was like, oh, there's just coaching is the skill. And it's like, oh no, now that's being ripped into 10,000 pieces that we're having to understand.
Totally. And you know, you've kind of hit on a topic that I mean, I think this is a good segue from your other question, which is like, I think coaching is one of those insanely valuable skills that will continue to be really important for not just to be coached, but actually for individuals to learn. This will get me like in all sorts of hot water with some number of coaches, but I think when I look at sort of the history of coaching, you know, coaching started out as kind of this sort of unlicensed psychologist, essentially, was kind of how people viewed it, right? And then you know, there were enough people that were getting like a really big advantage from sitting with somebody and instead of being focused on the past and all the traumatic events in your life that you want to unpack, it was being very future focused on your goals and someone to help you unblock how to get there, right? And so, okay, this is really something. This can be a big advantage for people in their lives. Then this sort of industry sprouted up around coach certification, and a lot of what they wanted to say was anyone can be a coach, right? Anyone should be a coach. Anyone, you know, and I firmly believe anyone can do coaching. Not
Yes.
anyone can get people to pay them for their time to be their coach. And so I think
No.
where the world is going, like when we look at coaches, we look heavily at their background. I want to see that they have been promoted multiple times at a company, that they are a high performer like the people they're working with, not so that they can dispense advice, right? I do believe it is a great thing that coaches aren't just sort of like regurgitating some playbook that worked for them 10 years ago. But
No, because generative AI can do that better, to be
yes,
honest.
yes,
Generative AI
exactly.
can do that better. You want 10 tips to make your day better? Ask
Yes.
ChatGPT.
What I want is I want someone who has the capability and credibility to advise, because I know that person is prestigious and self-similar, right? So when I match a software engineer with someone who has been who's been a VP of engineering, right? That person is, okay, cool, they're like me, they're prestigious. So I'm now dialed in. My motivation is here. I'm listening to what they have to say, and they are capable and credible enough to wear an advisor hat when needed, but they're also capable and credible enough to say, I'm not going to tell you the answers, and it's not because I don't know it. It's because I want you to find it. But instead of the other person saying, well, it's because you have no idea what you're talking about. It's they obviously do, right? And that's the kind of coach that I think makes the coaching process work.
Yes.
End of rant.
Well, no, but I think it's a really important point, because this goes back to what I've been saying throughout is there is so much more complexity to nurturing and growing talent than we often recognize. And so when we try and shortcut this stuff and go, so what's the easy button? Like, how do we just buy the AI chatbot that coaches our people up to top performance? It's like, well, it doesn't exist. There is no such answer to that kind of a thing, because growing and developing a human being is a very complicated mix of psychology and behavioral science and neuroscience and all these different things, where you're dealing with environmental factors and you're dealing with all this stuff. And there's not just a like slap it on and go, there you go, now you're going to be a top performer. And I think getting to the point you just talked about there about the coach piece, that's just one example of the kind of work that has to happen institutionally within an organization to say, okay, building trust as an example. Well, we know that that's an important skill for leaders. But what really about that? What really goes into it? And what are the components of that? And how do we actually help people understand how to do that really well? Because you could get the tip sheet. Here's 10 steps to build trust on your team. You might actually execute those 10 steps and completely annihilate trust in your team.
Yep.
And it's because it's not that simple.
When I think of where AI will make a big impact in learning, I actually think the story of where tech has made a big impact in learning is I am motivated to do something, and I need the ideal content in the ideal size for my query. And to me, that like AI will actually come in and probably be more disruptive to things like whether it's YouTube or whether it's LinkedIn Learning or whatever it is. It's that pull, right? For things that are pull based. If you have the AI coach, that's sort of sitting there, no one goes and meets with their AI coach, right? For just you have to have the occasion, the relationship, the reason, the sense that the company is actually investing in you. If literally it's just sort of hey, I could have ChatGPT do this thing, right? No one will use it, right? But where I think AI comes into play in the very near term is I have a need, I have a query, I have a question, and I want the ideal right answer to it quickly and packaged in the right way. AI is incredible for that, and that is an element of coaching, right? There is it's a piece of the pie, but I think the vendors who call it an AI coach, I don't think will be very successful in kind of displacing the whole thing.
Well, and I think where we're getting at, for people who aren't coaches or aren't thinking about coaching, there's actually a lot of relevance to this point that we're having, because I think this is the exercise that every individual is going to have to go through in their professional sphere and go, okay, because even just what we talked about, this changing role of coaches is actually a very similar challenge to everyone going through what I'm a marketer, I'm a finance person, I'm a this. It's like, well, you're actually going to need to start to examine this, because some of the folks I know who are very successful coaches are actually using AI really powerfully, because they're going, now instead of me using my time, doing these transactional things, I'm allowing AI to take care of the transactional components so that I'm investing my time on, like what we described, those human to human interactions that are extremely critical. And rather than me trying to think up the stuff or come up with this, I'm using it to disciple or discern or coach through this kind of a thing, instead of, hey, I have this question. Can you just give me some answers to this? Well, you know what? Like, use this for that. I'm here for these purposes. And it's actually, but it's an evolving role. And I think that's what I'm seeing when it comes to nurturing the skills of every employee. Is it's like, well, we're going to have to redefine and reimagine what everyone's job looks like in this new world. And that's a lot of work. And there is no, well, what's the blueprint? Well, we aren't there yet.
Yeah, we've been in a world for a long time where knowledge and skill was the limiting factor, and the world we're moving into is one where you essentially have an army of software engineers and marketers and all sorts of sort of skill-based entities at your fingertips. And so in that world, it's actually sort of agency that becomes the limiting factor, right? How much agency, how much are you able to just sort of take charge and make decisions and be empowered to do so? And so I think that that is sort of a lot of the shift that we'll start to see.
Yeah, no, and it's an uncomfortable shift, and it can be a very hard look in the mirror. I made a post yesterday about this because I was on a podcast talking about the fact that, I hear sometimes people talk about, oh, this generative AI, it doesn't really work very well for me. And I have a friend, if he listens to this, he'll laugh because we joke about this, but he was somebody who couldn't Google anything. He still can't Google anything to save his life. And it was one of those things where it's like, well, actually the gap is your ability to communicate what you're trying to do. And so it's a very similar type thing where we're actually going to need to upskill and change and improve ourselves, because it's like, well, now we're working in this new world where your effectiveness, your success is going to be about your ability to translate what's up here into action. And a lot of times it was just faster to just go, well, I'll just do that myself. But now to your point of, well, you may have a whole army of software engineers at your beck and call, AI army of them. If you can't communicate and translate, here's what we're trying to accomplish that I need you to accomplish very well, you're not going to be effective in your job, and it will impact you significantly. But that's a core skill problem, not necessarily well, is this an AI problem or whatever?
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Okay. Well, Evan, or not Evan, why did I say Evan? Nick, I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. And again, I think one of the things that you've really hit on is how important it is that we focus on this nuanced approach to identifying and doing it. I think, something that you've reinforced is it is possible. I think sometimes people hear this and they just go, there's just no way to do it. And I see from your nod that you're like, you can do it. But I think you would agree that there's no shortcutting the hard work to get there. Is that fair?
100%. Look, I see, I'm in a privileged position of, I get to see transformation happening all the time, right? Am I in our clients' coaching sessions? No, right? We have we have a distance there, but do I see what they say about our coaches, to our coaches, our facilitators, our trainers? There's real growth happening, and it can happen, right? I think a lot of times people are focused on what's new, right? Let's always focus on what's the newest thing all the time. I think the message I would send to people is often it's really about what's worked for a long time, right? And I think going back to real kind of human connection, how do we help people learn in the way that humans are really designed to learn from other humans, from people who are prestigious and similar to them, goal directed, right? I think the more people can go back to those sort of ways of learning that have already existed, the more you can really power amazing programs within your company.
What I love about ending on that note is at a time where it can feel like everything's up in the air, everything's changing, everything is all over the place. I 100% agree with you. And I think it goes back to some of the ecclesiological wisdom of nothing is really new. There's different flavors, there's different styles, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of timeless consistency that threads throughout all that. And I hope that brings people some semblance of calm to the fact that, yeah, there's no denying that it's chaotic right now, but there is a path forward, and it may feel a lot more familiar than you realize once we actually tap into it. So thank you again, Nick, for your time and this conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed and benefited from what we talked about. And yeah, hopefully it inspires you to see that there is a path forward despite whatever you're dealing with right now. So with that, I hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday. Keep an eye out for the Reflections article. If you didn't catch the whole conversation, you can see some of the biggest takeaways on my Substack. And with that, have a great week. We'll see you on the other side.